Glad to greet you all, starting a new year, and very pleased to our present speaker, and I hope we'll have many more coming months. And now I'm very happy. Stan Tenen, we've known him for quite a while, and I find his shapes and his meaning are very exciting, and to do with the donut. Stan Tenen.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. I've got about, I think, 3 or 4 days worth of material here, so as usual things will roll along, but I want to leave time at the end so that we can discuss some of these issues, because for the first time I want to not just do the geometry, I want to discuss some of the philosophical implications, if we can call them that.
Stan,
Yeah.
you know we break halfway through.
Yeah, we'll break in about 50 minutes,
When
I
you
think.
want to break, you
Right.
say so.
Yes, I think we've got someone watching that. So again, welcome everyone. The title of the talk is The Alphabet in Our Hands, and if you haven't already figured it out, you'll see what it's all about fairly quickly. I'm not going to review what we've done in the past as much as I have in the past. I'm going to have to assume certain things are known, and I'm just going to summarize them very quickly. But I wanted to start by playing you something from this little tape recorder, which will take a second or two to cue up, I think. And I should have done that first. I didn't think of it. And I want you to just close your eyes and listen to what you think of it. For those of you who are familiar with the work we've been doing, and I want to remind everyone, this is still work in progress, and things will change, and not everything I say is going to be absolutely so, and there are a lot of missing pieces, and we can't get into everything tonight anyway. But what that is the sequence of letters in the text of Genesis, in the Hebrew text of Genesis, played out one by one on a 22 note per octave scale. There are 22 letters in the short form of the Hebrew alphabet. It's played out on 9 different simulated instruments. This was done on a computer. All of the instruments, like we are going to see about the letters, are formed by aspects of the hand. And if there's time later, I'll get into that a little more deeply, but if not, I wanted you to know the instruments that are used, which are listed in the 150th Psalm, and supposedly used at the Temple of Solomon, are also related to the same form that we're going to talk about generating the alphabet. Let's see, I wanted to start to set the scene a little, to give a sense of a philosophical perspective, by reading a very short quote from a book by a physicist in Minnesota named Roger Jones. This is a book called Physics as Metaphor, which is a wonderful book, very readable, and it's not a lot of physics. It's a lot of physics as metaphor. The main point, or one of the main points that he makes about the use of physics and why people do physics and how physics is understood, and it's just a simple sentence, he says, the principal motive behind our scientific metaphors is the avoidance of death. That sort of spans the subject matter, I think. So think about that. What is it that connects physics with our need to deal with our mortality? To some extent, that's what we're going to talk about, although we're not going to talk about that explicitly. So let me review what everyone who has heard these discussions before has heard, for those who haven't. Most people as children have had the opportunity to make paper models, perhaps, and you cut out a piece of paper and it's set up to make a particular model, and it's got tabs and slots. And if you put tab A into slot A and tab B into slot B, the piece of paper, the model, folds up into the intended form. It's pretty simple. I didn't bring Dymaxion globe, I usually have, but that's how I put it together as a child. If you take the Hebrew text of Genesis and you look at the first verse, which is the first natural unit of the text, and you write the letters out one each on a bead chain, and curl the bead chain up so the same letters line up, just like tab A into slot A and tab B into slot B, then the bead chain folds itself up into an identifiable form. Now, this is one of the earlier versions of that bead chain, which is now on a piece of paper. And what you can see is all the letters double up. And in fact, if you want more details, this is all laid out in some of the earlier lectures which are available. But the idea is that this pattern is so strong that if a letter were to have been miscopied or left out, or some other tragedy had happened and something was lost, you could uniquely replace that letter simply by reference to the other letters. That's how strong the pattern is. The reason for doing the music was to find out if these patterns continued beyond the first verse. Because after all, maybe it was just a lucky hit that there was meaning at the letter level in the first verse. That would be a lot less important than if a whole text was coded at the letter level, which is apparently the case. If you agree with me, then you probably think that that music sounded like it was not random, but that there was some kind of cyclical structure to it. And again, we've discussed that at length before, and apparently there is. There's also been statistical work done by tenured professors, people who ought to know what they're doing, at UCLA and at Hebrew University and a few other places, which have shown that there are letter-level patterns in some of these texts, which are not in, for instance, the essentially similar story in the Samaritan version of the text, which is also in the ancient alphabet, but has slightly different spellings, and the letter patterns disappear. So we're dealing with a text that is coded at the letter level, letter by letter by letter. That's very important because most people think that the text of the Bible, of the Torah, is a story. It's a rare story indeed where the sequence of letters makes the words, which then have to be made into a story. And I'm not going to read those quotations tonight, but again, that's on some earlier material. So we have a text that folds itself up into this form. And the interesting thing about this form, before I put it away entirely, is that when you go around and you get to the end, you come up in the middle and start over again. That the form has 7 turns to it, and then in this kind of flattish form. And that when you get to the 7th turn, it comes up the middle and goes around again. Actually, you get to the 6th turn, and the 7th is up through the middle. Now, from Arthur Young and others, we have learned that you can identify something very similar. A torus, a donut, is identified mathematically by 7 colors on its surface, and they're arranged so every color is surrounded by the other 6. And you can see this vortex shape, this spiral path that outlines the edges of the colored regions. Now that's only there if you make all the regions exactly the same size and shape. Mathematically, you don't have to do that normally. This is an idealized form, where if you don't have any particular reason to do otherwise, you make everything equal. We're looking for Occam's razor, for minimal forms here. And this is one form of the torus, and it has 3 turns around with the 7 colors arrayed on it for 1 turn through the hole. And here's another form of torus. This one has 3 loops through the hole, the 3 heavy black lines, for each 1 turn around it. And this is a little noisier. but it also maintains that pattern of 6 around 1. Every color has 6 around, has the 6 other colors surrounding it. And as many of the people here know, Arthur has elucidated a wonderful theory of process based on the 7 stages that you can correlate with the 7 colors on the torus as a natural cyclic model. And it turns out that the verses at the beginning of Genesis, which is really all we've investigated in great detail, have that same cyclic pattern to them. They fit on the surface of a torus. And when you put them on the surface of a torus, the letters line up in the Hebrew text. Now, we can examine the torus, and as you can see from this wonderful model now that our friend Arthur Bloch is making, he calls it a hypersphere. And again, Arthur has pointed out that the volume of the torus is equivalent to the surface of a sphere in 4 dimensions. And so, in a true sense, you can think of this as a hypersphere. You can think of it as a sphere being pulled around a circle, although you couldn't see its full thickness. You can see a torus as a ring, as a circle being turned around a circle. But if you think of that circle as actually a sphere, then you can see why this would be a hypersphere. It's got an extra level of circulation to it.
Just give them the formula. The circle is pi r squared, and you go it around, so it'll be multiplied by 2 pi.
2 pi.
So 2 pi times pi r squared, that is the hypersphere.
Exactly. And again, very elegantly put and written up much better than I could. I highly recommend the Reflexive Universe to anyone watching this tape. It'll help you understand much of what's being said here. At least I think this follows from it. All right, so we have found that the first verse of Genesis makes these donuts somehow. And of course, there's a lot more to it than that. One of the early riddles, though, was I've only used half of the possible spaces on this form. And the half is a nice, elegant number, but it'd be nice to use all the spaces to have to find out what's the tightest form that the first verse can fit on. And a year or 2 later, and I again didn't bring that because I don't want to go into a lot of detail, we found that the first verse also fits on a form that looks like this. It's basically a cube with a little vortex on each face of it. It actually sits on a cube octahedron, even better. And it's got only one axis of spin symmetry, so it could have a real spear down the middle of it. And this, because of the way a cube can be pasted together, the opposite faces identified, is a mathematician's model of how a hyperdimensional torus would look if it was pushed back into 3 dimensions. This is just the outline, one outline of a hypertorus, a bagel of the gods, if you will.
Would that be a cube with opposite faces?
Yes.
Connected?
The opposite faces, if you look through this very carefully, you'll find the opposite faces are mirror images of each other. It's as if you took this face and pulled it around and pasted it onto this face. Yeah. And that would give you 3 rings. And again, you can look at some of the other presentations for the details on this. And so this is a hypertorus, if you will. On this form, as it turns out, all but 4 places are filled up with letters. So it's a more compact representation of the first verse. I'm going to show you rather quickly, I think, when we get into this, that we now have a form in which those 4 places disappear. They turn out to be crossing points on a knot, and if you were to have 2 letters there, there would be a double labeling of the cross, of the crossing point on the knot. And so what you want is only 1 letter. And it turns out on one of these knots that's on the table, that's what happens. All right, so now we have found that we have this first verse, and it makes that pattern, and now we can look a little more closely at it. Mathematicians are very much into elegance and simplicity and minimalism, and so we can take these 2 toruses with their 2 kinds of 7 color maps, this one 3 around for 1 through, and this 3 through for 1 around, and we can simply throw away the whole donut and just look at the outline. The white one is like the big torus. This is just the edge of the 7 color map. And you can still see the 3 turns, a little heart shape in the middle there. And this one is just 3 loops. This is like the smaller model. And these are not knotted at all. These are completely open loops. You could pull this apart into an open loop. There's no knot tied in here. They're 3 coils. In fact, you can find that if you looked at this edge, there's a form that was in the math journals recently because an artist made it, called an umbilic toroid. And the edge of this umbilic toroid has that same 3 coils on it. Okay. Now the interesting thing about an umbilic toroid, you can see that it would have like a triangular cross section and it's sort of twisted as it comes around. Well, we'll see later where that comes from, but I'll give you a clue. Here's a column that's got a twist in it. And if we could paste this end onto this end, then these edges would become 3 loops. And in fact, on that version, here it is. Again, these are not knotted. This just outlines the edge of that little form in the middle, which we're going to talk about as we go on. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because of what we found from it. If you look at either of these, you can abstract them very simply. Instead of making the donut flat like a bagel, you can notice that donuts don't come in the world like bagels. They come in the form of apples. Apples. If you were to take the stem out and the seeds out and the flower off, this would be just like a dimpled sphere form of donut, sort of like a jelly donut, except it has the hole goes through. And we have a model here of what that would look like. And as you can see, if you were to slice vertically through your apple, if I could find where the slice is, there it is. It's got cross sections that are more elliptical than circular. But it's still obviously a donut. It still has this puff and fall through itself effect. Now, if you take this form and you put it on the apple, these black lines are what happens if you trace the blue lines on here and make it kind of smooth. You find that it divides the apple up into what we're going to find are actually 6 pieces, but I've only got a half here marked off. 6 hands. And these 6 hands can be lifted off. We'll lift off one of them or the other. And they look like this. And they fit on the hands. Now, I want to step back a little, and I want to make sure that we're not getting ahead of ourselves. Yeah, I want to read you some quotations from the rabbis about the hands. But I guess rather than just holding off on it, I should come right out and say it. If you look at these completely asymmetrical forms, there's no 2 ways they look the same. From different directions, you'll find that shadows of them are all of the Hebrew letters. All of the yellow outlined letters in these columns are actually shadows, not of these thicker ones, but of this thinner one, which is easier to make the shadows from. So let me take a moment and read a couple of quotations so you get a sense of where we're going with this. Now these are in your pack, so I won't take too much time with it. This is from Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, quoting from Maimonides, discussing in the Guide to the Perplexed a verse from the Psalms, or actually from Torah initially. He says, the pious were therefore particular to minimize the time when they could not reflect on God's name. So pious people, religious people, are supposed to be aware of God all the time. And they cautioned others, saying, let not your minds be vacant from reflections on God. In the same sense, King David said, I have set God before me always. He's at my right hand. I shall not be moved. And Maimonides explaining it says, what he meant was, I do not turn my thoughts away from God. He is like my right hand, which I do not forget for even an instant because of the ease of its motions. Another quotation, we'll talk about that in a minute. The letters, this is from Rabbi Kaplan again. The letters are said to pertain to foundation, since it is only through the letters that wisdom and understanding can come together and be coupled. As discussed earlier, wisdom is pure nonverbal thought. Understanding, on the other hand, can only be verbal, since if an idea cannot be expressed verbally, it cannot be understood. The only link between nonverbal wisdom, which is in the mind in the Hebrew tradition, and verbal understanding, which is understanding of the outer world, consists of the letters of the alphabet. And I think I will skip the next little section there. I'm going to read you the last quotation also. This is from Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg, writing in his book on the Hebrew letters, published recently. The mouth, the secret of creation in the present moment, whose breath represents the continual emanation of energy matter, is between the two eyes, and he goes on and on. The idea is the mouth is this connecting thing where this energy matter connector, the breath, comes from. And he also says the word memory itself in Hebrew means a source of speech. Now, just to let you know that this isn't entirely exclusively any one tradition, and we'll talk about the difference between different traditions that have preserved these ideas later. This is from The Sufi Path of Knowledge by William Chittick, talking about the work of Ibn Arabi, I believe. And we don't have these quotes, so I'm just going to read it for you. He says, and I'm excerpting very narrowly here because we just don't have time. He says, let's see, therefore the entities become manifest within the breath of the All-Merciful, just as letters become manifest within the human breath. He says, the analogy between letters that take shape in the human breath and the all-merciful breath provides the basis of one of the Sheikh's major modes of describing the cosmos. Just as the Arabic alphabet has 28 letters, and there's a variation from the Hebrew, which in its full form has 27, and the Greek, which has 27, through which the names of all things may be pronounced, so also the cosmos has 28 basic letters, which combine to produce all created things. Each letter of the alphabet issues from a particular point. Here further. The real is the root of the one unique being. The root. Just to give you a sense of where I'm going with this. You might think this looked a little like a taproot. It also looks like a lot of other things. Each tradition has different language that it uses to describe what we're going to find is the same form. The real is the root of the one unique being, referring to God. And again, just for the sake of brevity, I think I'm going to have to not keep going. I'll do one more section. So the cloud is like the human breath, the manifestation of the cosmos when the cloud extends into the void in accordance with the levels of the engendered things is similar to the human breath extending from the heart to the mouth. The manifestation of the letters in the path of the breath and in the words is similar to the manifestation of the cosmos from the cloud, which is the real's all-merciful breath. Within the ordained levels among the supposed extension, not within a body, from which is the void filled by the cosmos. Well, we could go on with these. I'll see what just one is. One last one. The breath defines the dynamic interrelationship between God as the non-manifest and God as the manifest. And this is from a Sufi Arab position. So what do we have here? Let's talk about this idea of hands and breaths and letters and all of that. If the letters of a scriptural text are determined by some kind of pattern, they're set by a pattern. And if the translations are a clear text meant to describe that pattern at a more general level for the general public, then that pattern of letters is what's most important. Here we have a form which generates the letters. you look at it from their various directions, and not only do you see the Hebrew letters, and I haven't done all the work, but we have examples of it if you want. You also generate the Arabic, and in a very closely related form, you generate the Greek letters. All three of those alphabets are called sacred. Why? Why make an alphabet where there's a central object, and if you look at it from various directions, those are the letters of the alphabet? Well, the idea that I presented earlier is that the sequence of letters in canonized texts determines a meditation that you can experience if you could turn this form over in your mind's eye. But it's a very confusing form to look at. You can all try this. No one's going to tickle you. Close your eyes. No tricks. Everyone close your eyes. Point to the ceiling. Don't open your eyes. Ask yourself, do you know where your fingers are pointing? Do you know which finger is up? Do you know where your other fingers are, where your thumb is, which way your hand is facing? Now, without moving your hand, open your eyes and look at your hand. Well, you're approximately right at least. Did anybody get it wrong? Essentially from birth, even a blind person can always visualize their own hands, can reach behind them and pick something up. Our body is something we can naturally visualize. But the hand is very special, and the human hand is specialer yet. We are supposedly of higher consciousness than other creatures on Earth, with maybe a few exceptions, because of our opposable thumb, the fact that our hand grasps and has a self-referential effect, closes on itself. The word human comes from the Latin manus, which means hand. But more important than that, the hand represents the means by which we as individuals, once we become aware of something that we would like to act on, when we form that will in our mind, it's totally subjective, doesn't have any external existence. When we have that will, we act in the world by moving our hand. We take something totally subjective in our completely private mind space, and we enter objective physical reality with our hand. The human hand is the human embodiment of a general principle that projects consciousness into physics. And if we look at that general principle of projection from all the possible directions we can look at it, then we can, in theory, take any path possible in consciousness or in physics. You know, they used to teach dancing. I think I've been calling them Arthur Murray footprints. If you step in the footprints on the floor, you learn to do the dance. They are the alphabet for this flatland dance. If you can follow the directions of the letters in your mind, you're taking on a kind of internal yoga, which produces an experience which validates the religious tradition of the text that was canonized. So we have here a general principle applicable to consciousness and to physics. Why to physics? Well, it turns out, and again, we're not going to go into details. I didn't even put the chart up because if I did, I would probably get lost in it. Turns out mathematicians have proven that if you're examining a hypersphere in anything from 4 through 6 dimensions, whatever those might be, there are 27 lines naturally on that surface. They're the 27 solutions to the general cubic equation. You don't have to know about that. But they turn out to correspond to the 27 Hebrew letters with the final letters added on. And they fit the same pattern that Arthur Young presents on the surface of the torus, on the hypersphere, this 7-stage pattern, if you take the process and you put it between unity and wholeness. If you take the 7 stages of process and you add an initial and a final stage, a seed and a fruit, with the process being the tree between them. And when you do that, you have 9 letters on each level and 3 levels, and you have 27 letters. And you can assign meaning, as I've shown in the previous talk, to the letters based on those 27 permutations. And each letter gets an explicit meaning, and that meaning appears to be good in all languages. And we may or may not have a little time for that at the end. But let me show you the letters. I want to make one other review statement about this. We're starting at the center of an apple. Took this right off the apple. Comes right off the apple. So this must be the seeds. Genesis, and quoting in the Hebrew Kabbalistic document, the Zohar, both say, fruit tree yielding fruit whose seed is in itself. If this is the seed, then this is the tree, and this is the fruit. This is the fruit tree yielding fruit whose seed is inside of itself. This is what I was calling, last time I was here 2 years ago, naked recursion. Acorn, oak tree, chicken, egg. This embodies the whole path from the egg to the chicken, from the acorn to the oak tree to the acorn with a new germ inside of it. Full life cycle. This naked recursion, or this flame of consciousness, because there's a flame shape, generates the letters. Let's do the alphabet then. And this is all going to be new for this group. There is a videotape that we've made of between the last time I was here and this time, which goes through these motions, because I didn't have them 2 years ago. Now here's what I'm going to do. You can look at this chart, and we can make these charts available to people who need to see them. This is a particular Hebrew alphabet set here. This is a development of the Hebrew alphabet as it was written in Islamic Spain, which may explain why the Arabic letters look similar, about 1,000 years ago, roughly, very roughly, up until the Inquisition, up until the expulsion they were using this hand. The rabbis still use that hand. It's a true hand similar to the way a Torah scroll would be written, but it's a little more fluid. We think it's a more original form, and that the form used on the Torah scrolls was specially stylized so a letter could not be miscopied. Now here's the secret. We deduced meanings for the letters off of that logical chart based on the 27 directions that you can move in physics. That means that the letters represent all the possible ways you can move in hyperdimensions in physics, and that's the base space for doing physics regardless of the physical theory you're dealing with. And we said they also correlate to directions in the mind, directions in consciousness. But how do we learn those directions? And how do we gain confirmation of those meanings? How can something so abstract be universal? Because it's claimed that Hebrew is the pre-Babel universal language. It's claimed by people who believe in the Abrahamic tradition. As we'll see as I read some more quotes, this is an older idea, but it's been embodied in a coherent way in these traditions. In fact, we all have the same DNA in every cell in our body, even though we make many different organs. And so the difference between the different religious traditions is they represent different organs. Each is a different embodiment, a different vessel. But the flame inside, the DNA inside, the Gnosis, the personal mystical experience, is very similar. In any event, I'm going to give you the name of the Hebrew letter, I'm going to give you the meaning of the Hebrew letter, and I'm going to show you the gesture that displays the letter. Now what I mean by that is, this model in my right hand, when I look at it with my eyes open, it will look like one of these letters. If I were to close my eyes, wouldn't make any difference, I could still see them. Because I can always see my hand, and because this fits my hand like a glove. Now these may not all be right. This is a work in progress. Most of the letters can only be seen in one position or you break your wrist. Clearly that's not the way it works. Some of the letters are very simple, like this perfectly straight little vav. You can see it any number of places. So the only way I can tell where the vav is I have to put it between the hey and the zayin. Otherwise I wouldn't have any way of knowing where the vav was. So again, there's room for variation here and for improvement, and maybe someone who can move more fluidly than I can could demonstrate it better anyway. When I'm saying the letter's name, I can see that letter in my right hand. If you could look through my left hand into my eye, you would see the letter in my left hand. That's the difference between the two hands. They're mirror images of each other. In fact, they do something very cute. You can see they're mirror images, they wouldn't do that. Okay, let's do it. This is Aleph. Aleph means everything. I'm pointing to my solar plexus. Beit is to break open, to be born. This is Beit. Gimel. Gimel means a camel. Camel goes back and forth between oases. There's its two humps. They're the two oases. You can see it's going to be an oasis because these flat things are the oases. When we turn the model over later. Dalet means to divide, to pour down, to become poor, and I'm pouring down. Dalet, same in Greek. A delta is where a river divides out into the sea. We would say it DLT, dilutes or dilates there at the DLT delta or Dalet. Same letters, same root. Hey is a window or a frame. Now I can't see these. Yes, I can. Right through the side of my head, because I always know where my hands are. And you can see the hay. In this case, it's easier to see in my right hand. Vav is a pin. I'm going to find it over my spine. Zion means to project. That's pretty obvious. Don't get in the way of the energy beam. Chet means to encompass or to encircle. It's down here. Encompass or encircle. Tet means all, total, complete. I'm holding the whole thing in my hands. My hat is falling off. Yud is my hand. It could be any place out here. It's a very small letter, so I can't be exactly sure, but it obviously means to extend the hand. Chaf is the palms. I'm looking at my palms. If I come up a little higher, it becomes Lamed. Lamed is the flame. I'm sorry, I didn't need the names of all this. Yud is, well I did. Yud is the hand, Chaf is the palm. Lamed is a flame. It means to, or to learn. Light, to light the mind, Lomed, the flame. It's Aladdin's lamp. There's the reflector and there's the flame. And it reflects the light right at the second focus of the ellipse back into my eyes. Well, it may not be quite that direct. Depends on how you make it. It could even be that direct. I don't know for sure, so I shouldn't tell you that. Mem means source or from or out of. The source of speech is at the throat. If you would not want to break your wrist, this is the only way you can see the letter Mem. Here, you can see it. Well, maybe I can use the smaller model. This is the right-handedness. Then you'll be able to see it easier. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, you can see the Mem right there. Mem is right down the bottom. Okay, Mem is from, source of. Nun means the neck. The nun is just this shape. Samak means to support or to sustain. By the way, nun in English would be the noon connects the AM and the PM. Samak is to sustain. I'm making a cradling motion, and the samak is in my hands. Ayin means the eyes. Right up here. It's the ayin. Yes?
Which one is
Ayin means eyes.
that? The one?
Here, and here. This is the one it is. Where are you? Who asked? There. Yes? Ayin. Pay. Pay means the mouth. Where do you suppose my hand is going to go? It's pay. It also means to puff or to swallow. Pay. If you don't put your thumbs in your mouth, you can maybe a little variation, but that's pay. Tzadi is the righteous person. Tzadik, the zodiac, head and the stars, if you will, the tzaddik. The tzaddik has clean hands. And I can see the so-called Rashi tzaddik you will see right there. You seek to know Hebrew. Rashi tzaddik. Yes? Kuf means monkey or skull. Up here. I think I'm a monkey hanging from a tree limb. And I'm outlining my skull. Here's the skull. Reish means to radiate, the head, to rush out. Sheen is to shine, actually means a tooth, but a tooth is weird, toothy grin. It means sheen has many meanings, but it's basically spiritual energy shining on you. Sheen is up like here. Turns out sheen is exactly the opposite of beit in Hebrew, and it turns out that's the same on this model. Again, you know Hebrew, Rashi? Okay, if this is the Rashi sheen, yes, then this should be the Rashi beit. Yes? And tav is myself, itself, to mark, reflexivity. Aleph, beit, gimel, dalet, hey, vav, zayin, chet, tet, yud, chaf, lamed, mem, nun, samet, ayin, hey, tzadi, kuf, reish, shin, tav. This is on a tape that we brought with us as a supplement. If people would like to study it, I think we've got a few copies here that are available after the presentation. You can see that the natural meaning of the letters, the natural meaning of the gesture is the meaning of the letter, I think. And if you check some of the earlier material I presented, you'll see how it correlates even better.
10 minutes left.
10 minutes left. We're not doing too well, folks. Well, actually, we're not doing as bad as I thought. We're halfway to what we thought I would be at. I want you to, it's all right. There's really very little hope that we can get everything in. And I think it's going to be a little too much anyway. But I think we'll have enough for the basics. I want you to guess what this word means. I'm going to move between the two letters, a two-letter root, which is unusual, but there are some like that. Somebody tell me what this means. Anybody? What am I describing?
Torus.
Yeah, that's pretty good. A little simpler, folks.
Apple.
You're all right. This is the root for round. Gimel lamed, CL. It's our word coil or cycle. Okay, I think we'd best move along because of the time problem. I wanted to point out something else, and that is that the purpose of both our hands and of our speech is to make distinctions. And that what you end up looking at here is a model of a projection where you start with conscious will and you breathe, you project, and you have speech or hand motion. That you have a situation in the Hebrew tradition where God contracts himself, tzimtzum, then throws a line out, and that manifests the universe. The same idea. And we're going to see that repeated a little later. I wanted to read a couple of, I hope, very quick quotes now. From several different sources. This is from, I didn't number this one. All right, I'll read it anyhow. Oh, this one's for later. I thought I numbered them all. Number 4. This is from a book called Egyptian Miracle by Shwala de Lubitz. He talks about how in pharaonic Egypt, he says, and also in India, although with dangerous complications, which is his note, he says, the one and only God who is unknowable is an idea derived by logical conclusion. This is a more scholarly source, Carl Lukart, writing SUNY Press, right, fairly recently. He says, all the while, however, picking up from something he was saying earlier, the blending of divine names and functions could not have been understood easily, could have been understood easily by the simple fact that, for learned ancient Egyptians, there has persistently been a single God who has staged the entire continued polytheistic show. No less than 9 divine names were fused in Heliopolis into a single Ennead, a ninefoldness. On what basis could a Christian scholar classify his own theology, Trinity, as monotheism and keep insisting that the Heliopolitan Ennead belongs to a polytheism? The monotheism of the pharaohs had no difficulty sponsoring, embracing, and absorbing lesser provincial deities throughout Egypt as additional members or offspring of the internal divine Ennead. And it goes on with that direction. This is from, well, I guess one more. Right. This is from Anne Macaulay, writing about the Apollo god in the Greek stories. And she says, and finally, let us return to Apollo. It came as a shock to me to find that this god was derived from a geometric figure. And she provides what she thinks that is, which I disagree with, but very interesting. And she goes on to say, again cutting in the middle for the sake of time, the concept is total and the harmonic nature of the music demonstrates the great harmony of creation. Apollo can thus be seen as the logos, or in another sense, as the definition of the absolute God. Now, the reason I'm reading those is because of the little story that is in the material we handed out about Abraham, which I do want to tell you before the break, regardless of how late we get. And I think we're just going to have to run with it, and we'll take a break right after I do that. But you can read it in more detail in the handouts, and we'll have that accompany the videotapes if we make it available. The standard story is that Abraham is raised in the house of his father Terah, who was an educated cosmopolitan person who comes from Ur of the Chaldees, and he's an idol maker. He makes idols of stone and wood and metal, and he sells them to the local population. And Abraham is down in the shop one day and says, "Oi, this stuff is no good at all. They're dead. They don't think. They don't eat. What good are they? Daddy's a ripoff." And he smashes all the idols and discovers somehow the one God. And we're supposed to believe that an intelligent, educated, cosmopolitan person who is of high character, because these are supposedly good people and the founders of this faith, are somehow selling these rip-off idols. That's the simple story. The rabbis elaborate on it, and I'm going to elaborate even more on what the rabbis say. It seems to me that the idols of an intelligent, educated person in any age are the icons of the culture, are the models used in each and every culture to describe the sacred, whatever is thought to be sacred, even if it's money, which may be our icon. And different cultures, because they have different experiences and different tools and different times and different needs, look to different things in nature to model certain natural qualities of life, of the sacred quality of life, the birth and death cycle, acorn oak tree, acorn oak tree. And to cite the ones that I put down, but there are many more. The ancient Chinese, according to Moran, are supposed to have set out with their first original set of ideograms, 28 of them, based on 28 mansions of the lunar zodiac, a cyclic system. The Persians and the Greeks used the solar zodiac, and they had gods and goddesses warring with each other as the zodiac went around. And the Druids are into the life cycle of trees and living things and vegetables. All peoples pick something cyclic to represent the cyclic nature of life. There's nothing wrong with any of these models. They are all true. But none of them are universal. Each is specific to its time and culture and to the understanding of its metaphor. And each is limited to the extent that the model is limited. Abraham, in my version, acting as a mathematician, says, I don't need to eat the dough in the donut. All I need to know is the 7-color map. I don't even need the 7-color map. All I need is the outline. Let's strip away all the embodiments. Let's take out the lunar zodiac, let's take out the solar zodiac, let's get rid of all the trees. They're all true. But let's, as mathematicians, just look at the unembodied principle underneath all of them. What do they all have in common? Well, they have this quality of naked recursion, naked in the mathematical sense. They represent just the cyclic nature of all things, including the cyclic nature of our consciousness, which reflects back to itself, which is what our thumb is about. And so when you strip away all of these embodiments, you end up without any graven images. You end up with a sequence of feelings, parts of a meditation perhaps, parts of the sense of how life organizes. And that's, by definition, the one God. That is a unity underlying everything. And if it's also a geometric, mathematician's type model of unity, then you can learn certain things about why there is a one God and what the function of that is by examining the model. And just to speed things up again and to make the point before the break, and I'll try to do it very quickly because then we're going to go to the drawings after the break. In Hebrew, the first letter of the first verse of the text of Genesis is the letter bet, which, as I said, means to be born, to break open. It means both and booth. In Hebrew, it actually means a house, or it means two. In English, spelled bet could either be B-O-T-H or B-O-O-T-H. The T and T-H sounded the same. Same word in Hebrew and English. It means the distinction between inside and outside, which is what a house makes. The primary distinction. It is the first distinction, the mark of distinction, as mathematician Spencer Brown would put it, in a wonderful little book called Laws of Form. Talks about how you can generate all kinds of mathematics simply from making a mark that distinguishes inside from outside. And other mathematicians have shown that you can derive all of formal logic just from the mark of distinction. The mark of distinction is the Hebrew letter bet. It's just what the donut does. It distinguishes the inflow from the outflow, the whole universe from the stuff inside. And for details on that, I refer you to Arthur's work or to some of the earlier videotapes. And that mark of distinction is the basis of what we do with our hands or with our speech also. In fact, it's what our consciousness does, is make distinctions. Now, a physicist that we are all familiar with these days, a fellow named Penrose, has written a book called The Emperor's New Mind. He talks about the source of life on Earth. Again, this is what the sacred is about. And he points out rightly, as we all know, that all of the matter that the Earth is made of is created in the nuclear furnace at the center of stars, including our local star, the Sun. That comes from gravitational accretion, and that's part of his discussion in his book, and I'm not going to go into that. And he points out also that not just the matter, but also the energy needed to drive any process on Earth, including the tectonics of the Earth, because the heat in the planet is also from these nuclear materials and the heat coming in, the weather, the energy that drives, most importantly, life, photosynthesis, and all that comes from that, all comes from the sun, and that's the energy. But then he says, but what causes the reduction in entropy that life represents? Because we're not just energy-driven, we're self-organizing. There's information. Where does the information in DNA come from? What gave it up its own information to give this information? What became more entropic, more disorganized, so we living things could be more organized? And he points out the answer is something very interesting. It's because the sun is a hot, bright spot in a cold, dark sky. It is high contrast, maximum distinction. Because the ultraviolet photons that come into us get downgraded as they heat the planet and are radiated back out as infrared photons. And ultraviolet photons have less entropy than infrared photons. And we are in that stream of organizing informational energy. And so the physical hot, bright sun, big and bright as it is, but not infinitely big and bright, against the cold black sky drives the simple self-organizing properties of life. But we can go a step further. What gives us our self-aware type of consciousness? One level up from what cats and dogs supposedly have. That's debatable. Instead of hypothesizing or looking at just a finite, very bright spot, pretty far away in a black sky, let's go one step further. Let's examine the properties of an infinitely bright spot, infinitely far away. That would be much higher contrast, hyper contrast, driving hyper consciousness. That's why God has to be singular. That's not religious puffery. That's because if you want to explain where self-aware consciousness comes from, you are led to take Penrose's path until you reach an abstraction that is singularly distinctive. Again, that's that tzimtzum that the Kabbalists talk about, that contraction point against the sky. And so, let me look at my notes to make sure I didn't skip anything here, because it's hard enough to keep track of that if I fill everything in. I would like to point out that there are a couple of things that have that property, the high distinction property. We're about to have the break, don't panic. We look at that in different cultures and times in different ways. Taoists would look at yin and yang. Mathematicians might compare absolute symmetry, the symmetry of the polyhedra, with absolute asymmetry, the asymmetry of the vortex form. And the distinction, the difference between symmetry and asymmetry is as absolute as between a point, an infinitesimal, infinite bright point, and nothing. We could look at other models as well, including something called the Fourier transform, which is basically a gadget that takes the harmonics of music and breaks them down into a frequency spectrum. It's a spectrum analyzer. The Fourier transform of a single, very narrow, infinitely amplitude, exceedingly high pulse is a continuum of all frequencies. If that initial pulse is anything but infinite, the continuum is truncated. If it is anything but of zero duration, the continuum doesn't have all of its pieces in place. It's less than complete in time or space. Again, if we are looking at a universe that by definition includes all there is, the transform of all there is has to be an infinitely bright, infinitesimal pulse, singularity, which by definition we can identify with the one God, without in any way impugning anybody else's gods or goddesses. In fact, people sometimes present flying saucer theories of the Bible and of human intelligence and consciousness. I was talking to a scholar the other day, and I said to him, well, it doesn't really matter if the other cultures have all kinds of other strange beliefs. They're going to make the same abstraction. The one God, by definition, is the one God of the whole universe, and that's not just because I'm wearing a yarmulke and because my background is Jewish. That's because we've made a definition that's useful. And I'm saying that it is the same logic that was used by the Indians in Asia, by the Egyptians, and by the Greeks, according to these little quotations. Again, let me double check that I haven't left out anything. One more little point about this. We could also say that this is the hero's journey. This is the earth plane, and this is the transcendental world mountain. And you climb it in 7 stages. It is the mountain of high contrast, and you never reach the peak. This is the meditational point of the meditational path that you follow. And if you put 2 of these together, and I don't know if I have them, I'm about to stop. Let's do the big ones. You'll find they make these heart shapes. And as you know, the hands are an extension of the heart chakra, and this is the path with heart. Okay, let's take a break. We're going to go to discuss these posters, and we're going to have some nice discussion, and I want to get to both the poster and a discussion of what absolute truth might be. This is from a little Sufi magazine. Again, I'm reading this to give you a sense of the breadth of these ideas. I use the word breadth as a pun. This is the description of Rumi's poetry. It's a translation, but he's got a little discussion here too, of the Medlevi Sufi round dance. Now, look at what's in front of you as I describe the round dance. Also, the cover thing in front of you is easier to see maybe in the posters. He says at one point here that you have to think of 99 pearls. And we're going to come to that again later. But let me read from the poetry. If I can find it. Yeah, here it is. These are very, very short excerpts. There's much, much more we could go into. And he's describing the round dance. This is Rumi. And this is in translation, so you've got to read between the lines to get the depth of what's happening. He says, "Come, come, let us whirl about in the rose garden." And you can see why some of these forms would be described as lilies or roses or flowers. And we'll talk about these forms in a minute. Let us whirl like a compass around the point of divine grace. Let us now whirl about the grain which no granary comprehends. This is a seed in an apple, then it's a sacred seed. It's the grain that no granary comprehends. Then a little later he says, "I am turning beside the Sultan. I am like a goblet in the circle of dancers, turning from one hand to the other with my story." Goblet. See the goblet? And finally at the end he says, "Come, come, O thou, who are the soul of the soul of the soul." 3 levels of circles. 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. And that produces the chart. Of the round dance. "Come thou who are the walking cypress in the garden of the round dance." The walking cypress. Here's a little tree in the middle. And it's a foot that the form stands on. The rabbis have a story about teaching Torah while standing on one foot. "Come thou under whose feet is the fountain of light in the heaven of the round dance." And I think I'll stop there because we could go on forever, and it's beautiful poetry. Fountain. Fountain.
Reminds me of, you know what the word hurricane means?
Please.
The one-footed God.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, of course, the word in Hebrew for storm is sufa. The cloud is ein sof, and of course we have Sufis doing the dance.
Yeah.
And this is a hurricane. It's more than a hurricane. Let me get out of my quotation. I want to do one more set of quotes.
Ein sof. One is sof and the other is ein sof.
Ein sof is sof. Well, yeah, ein sof means not, or limitless in a sense. So it's kind of sof means stop. Like a cloud is sort of puffy stuff or stop thing. The end of the extent of it is its stop.
Well, it could be the
extension.
core and the substance.
That's right. Just before we came over today, I had the network news on, and they were playing the first pictures they've gotten of a black hole from the Hubble telescope. I'm going to pass these around because they're too small to see. These are the computer simulations of what the telescope saw. I'd like you to compare this with this. Now, please understand, there is no proof here that the ancients had any idea about black holes. This is a basic topology. It's a fundamental relationship. It is embodied in many ways. We may find out that this isn't a black hole, it's a bad photograph. It's not going to invalidate this theory. There's no particular one thing that's a proof. So let me just let these go around the room. And You can look at them close, and try to get them back to me, but they'll be on the network news again, I think. Finally, this is from a book by Ariel Benson, copyright 1932, and I'm sure not available, called The Zohar in Muslim and Christian Spain. The Zohar is one of the most important books of the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. And in Islamic Spain, up until the Inquisition, the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians really mixed it up pretty well. They were very friendly. They learned each other's teachings and respected them. And only when the generic Inquisition came through, because it comes through in every civilization sometime or other, did things go bad and the information gets scattered and lost and broken up. This is just the description from a Zohar point of view. But look at it in terms of what's up in front of you, and then we'll go into that in a little more detail. And I'm trying to, I can't read everything I've highlighted here. We'll be here all night. So, at the beginning, this is a section called Supreme Light. He says, then God created the world by causing a spark of the supreme light to go forth, and he caused a wind to blow from above against the wind that blew from below. Your hurricane again. A wind above, and of course the same thing would be on the bottom, a wind below. And moving a little bit ahead, he says, the indivisible point, illimitable and unknowable, because of its strength and its purity, has cast an aura outside itself that acts as a veil for the indivisible point itself. And moving down, thus has everything been formed by a movement of light, ever downward and outside of itself. And again, moving. Around the point, the penetration of its own light forms a ring or a palace. Okay, and again, skipping. So that emanating from the supreme point, all the degrees of creation are but envelopes, the one for the other. The envelope of the superior degree forms the brain of the degree next to it. This is the onion model of levels on levels concentrically set. And so you can see this is sort of like our alphabet matrix. It's a set of concentric donuts, like Penrose's twister. Layer on layer, brain on brain. And of course this, cup is the skull. So this could be the brain also. And again, this is one cultural time describing a common image. So someone could call it a brain, someone could call it an onion. When God created the world, he placed the waters of the ocean around the earth. And in the heart of the inhabited world, God placed Jerusalem. In the heart. If you look down on this, as I showed you with the models, you see these heart shapes. Chair is escaping. Maybe that's the vice presidential chair. And one more quote, just to finish it, because again, we could go on forever. Our world forms the center of the heavenly world, and this is a world. World, whole. It's enclosed by doors that lead to the upper realms. At each door are legions of angels. All right. These angels are nourished by an immense tree that rises out of 3 huge rocks in whose branches touch both heaven and earth. A huge tree, and as you can see from these knots, which we'll look at later, they all have 3-fold nature to them. In fact, you could also, I didn't bring the little geometric, the tetrahedral models. And the branches, of course, are this part over the side. You can see from here why they would be called branches. They're branches on the knotting form, which we're going to get to, I hope. Our world lies under the protection of the branches of this tree and remains invisible since its light is hidden by the branches. All right, we can go on and on. And, well, one last thing. But know that this is the sum of the whole matter. We're talking about the distinction between inside and outside, between consciousness and physics. That all in the lower world has been made in the image of the upper world. All that exists in the upper world appears to us here below as in a picture. It is all one and the same thing. As above, so below. What goes around comes around. Do unto others, etc. So now let's examine what we've got here. I have to tell you one other thing that you don't know if you haven't been here before. And again, I don't have time to go into it. But if you examine Buckminster Fuller's model of DNA, which he bases on a tetrahelical structure, a tetrahelix is nothing but a bunch of tetrahedra cemented together to form a column. And in fact, the column can be formed by simply pairing up these little flame shapes that are inside each chamber. And as it turns out, and again, you'll have to consult the previous presentation for that because we certainly don't have time. Turns out, in 1/3 unit turn of the helix, the tetrahelix, the faces match up exactly, well, not quite exactly. There's a small error, which he calls the unzipping angle. But you could paste this face onto this face. It's exactly 1/3 of a turn. It has room for exactly 22 triangular faces, which are the 22 Hebrew letters. So you could make a wick of a burning candle out of a string of tetrahedra, as Plato describes it. Of course, we're going to find out this is the burning candle and this is the wick. So if we take our tetrahelix, our alphabet tetrahelix, which makes 1/3 of a turn, has 11 tetrahedra, 22 faces, and we add 3 of them together. This is just shrinking it so it will fit. So we get 1 full turn. There'll be 3 full turns because each edge turns 1 full turn. We could go through this transformation. We can take this guy, bring it along here, and then take this and pull it around to touch the other side. And we would get this form. Likewise, we can take a knot. Now these are called Torus knots, and there are different ways of winding knots on toruses. And they are all mathematically called singularities or singular knots. They model the property of singularity to mathematicians. So again, we're back to the singularity idea. And you can find that all of these Torus knots that have 3 wings to them can be made by using this tetrahelix as the core, depending on how much twist you put in the middle. And it turns out, if we make the 3-5 Torus knot, which is this guy, and put the letters of the first verse of Genesis on it, and look at it from one direction, there are no ambiguous places. All the letters are accounted for, and there's no extra spots. And I don't have time to show you that here. It's kind of pretty. And you can see why it would look like an apple. You can actually see the bottom of the apple and the top of the apple, and you could even form a little womb in the middle if you wanted to for the seeds. That's the 3-5 knot. If we double it up, we get this knot. If we take our torus ring and we wind it the way it's shown here, this is called the 3-10 torus knot, and it sits on the surface of a dimpled sphere or on a ring. We can transfer it to a dimpled sphere from the ring. It's a standard way it's given mathematically. And if we want to look at the winding pattern, just look at this pattern: 0, 3, 6, 9, 2, 5, 8, 1, 4, 7, 0. Right? 0, 3, 6, 9, 2, 5, 8, 1, 4, 7, back to 0. It's your touch tone pad on your phone. I'll turn it sideways. It's a magic square on its diagonals and on its main vertical and horizontal center row and column of the number 15. And 15 is the Gematria, the numerical value of the shortest name of God, the one spelled Yud and He. So this is the God Torus. Christians might think it was a crown of thorns, something like that, or a wreath. You can see the similarity. And if you take this guy and crack open the torus inside and pull the coils around till they're all on one side and flip over this outer coil like I show, you can turn it into a dimpled sphere form of knot. And this one is the 3-10 torus knot. And the red outline is exactly the outline of one of our hands. And it's one of 6 of them. And in the center, the number of tetrahedra that would be there would be from, in one hand, the number of tetrahedra on this column would be 49. But it takes up exactly the same room as if it were 50 because of the unzipping angle in the tetrahelix. We had the Jubilee holding up before. 4950 is the Jubilee year. And if you remember the quote I read earlier, and there's another quote I didn't get to, about the 99 pearls, Well, that's the length of the whole column, top to bottom, from heaven to earth. And they're called pearls in some texts, and they're called gates in others, and they're called, you name it. Nobody knows how to translate the words because they don't have the model. So now let's look at the model. We went through the torus, and the torus makes the hand, and this particular knot, particular toroidal knot, makes this particular model. It makes 6 hands around a center point, 6 days of the week, around the Sabbath point, the still center. If you look at your chart for the meaning of the Hebrew letters, you'll find the word Sabbath in Hebrew means to sit within yourself, to meditate, to have a still center, to reach for this transcendental tip, this point. Now what I've done on this big chart is combine as many different traditions as I could think of buzzwords for. And so we've got, when Solomon is going to build the when Moses is going to have the ark built, he gets the best craftsmen in gold and silver and brass. The word gold and silver and brass is very interesting, because in the ancient world, gold was golden grain, or the gold of the sun. That's this point. And silver, kesef, now means money, attractiveness. Kaf saf, kaf is the palm, and saf is this whole saf, is the fruit. And brass in Hebrew is the same root as the word for serpent. There's the serpent in the apple, connecting the sun, the seed, and the fruit. Gold and silver and brass. Seed and tree and stem and branches and fruit and flowers. This is the waterfall. I showed you Aladdin's lamp. Down here there is a crescent. See this crescent? It's a star, the sun in the middle, star and crescent, the Islamic symbol. It's also the bow in the sky, the sign of the covenant. There's the bow. This is all the sky, the whole thing. This is the earth plane. Now you know where the flat earth model came from. Only our Dark Ages scholars just thought that the ancient philosophers really believed the earth was flat. Maybe the general public did. The only earth that was ever flat is the philosophical earth plane, on which the 4 rivers feed the tree in the middle of Eden, the circle of Eden. The 4 rivers are the 4 fingers that form each hand. And if there's 3 hands in the whole circle, there are going to be 12 hands on the rim. That would give us 12 tribes, 12 houses of the zodiac, 12 knights of the round table, and all the other 12 around ones. The whole apple sits on a, as you can see from the earlier presentations, cuboctahedral core. This forms the apple. It's got a sphere in the middle, that's the seed. It's surrounded by 12 spheres, that's the fruit. It's an in sphere and an out sphere, a hypersphere, the fruit. Same model again. This is also in the Greek tradition, the world egg, the cosmic egg, the Orphic egg, the apologeometry. It does generate the Greek letters also. This is the letter bet, the mark of distinction between inside and outside in Hebrew. You'll notice it's exactly this form, just turned on its side. This is the mark of distinction. It's the hand, the mark of distinction. What didn't I do here? Well, here's some more examples. So what you can see is going on is that you can make a general model that fits the descriptions in all the quotes I read, and many, many others that I didn't have time to read, which is a mathematician's idealization of the process of projection from inside to outside in general. Spencer Brown's mark of distinction. The distinction that the donut makes when the breath of God first goes poof. Oh, that's too poof. Goes poof. We should use a real hyperscaler. Goes poof. And of course, what will it do? It will extrude. I don't know if I put this through here. No, I'll crush it. You can extrude tetra-helixes. The 3 edges of this guy. You can see if I were to push this through here, these 3 ribs, just like this, extrudes the tetra-helix right through it. Is this formally true? Yes, it is. here is the mathematician's model of 12 of the 27 lines that define the general cubic surface in the hypersphere. And as you can see, it extrudes tetrahelixes. If you examine all the planetary bodies in the solar system that have molten cores, including the Sun and the Earth, you find they all have anomalous features at 19.5 degrees above or below the equator. That's where the main sunspot zones are. That's where the Hawaiian caldera is on Earth. Even though the mantle moves, the volcano stays at 19.5 degrees. That's where the red spot is on Jupiter. And the same on every other heavenly body that's got a molten core. If you were to look into here, across these, you'd see these vorticular forms. If this is the North Pole and this is the South Pole, then these centers are at 19.5 degrees above and below the equator. A molten core planet, after all, is toroidal. It spins on an axis with the molten stuff flowing around. The Van Allen belt form you've all seen, which is external, of course. And so the hypersphere projection appears to govern certain kinds of planetary physics. That's not proven, that's just a theory. Some of the people exploring the face on Mars have been working with that idea because the face on Mars specifies that 19.5 degree angle. That's another story entirely. Let's see, I want to start to sum up here because I think we're getting someplace. Yes. I want to talk about, now that we've done this, truth, and then I want to get into a discussion, have some questions. If I walked into a UC Berkeley physics lab, physics classroom, lecture hall, and I had under my arm a book, and I said, I got truth here, with a capital T. This is truth, absolute truth. Now I get one of two reactions, depending on what was actually in the book. If on the cover of the book it said, the digits in pi, people would say, oh, big deal, wise guy. Of course that's the truth. Everybody knows pi is fundamental to this reality. It's a mathematical abstraction relating to circles, radius, and circumference. Pi is the same on all planets, every place. It's purely conceptual. It is as close as we can come scientifically to truth with a capital T. And we can generate an infinite number of digits for pi because it's a transcendental number, and they're non-repeating. And in fact, if we shear off an unknown number of digits between the decimal point and where we start looking, pi appears to be a random number. But if we were to change any one digit, it would no longer be pi. And as soon as I tell you how far from the decimal point you are, it's immediately pi. What if the sequence of letters in a sacred text, a text that was canonized because it had such properties? How do you know which scripture to canonize and which not to? You take the better story. Oh, and if I walked into the room and under my arm I had the Bible, then I'd be laughed at. That's not the truth. That's just some religious tradition's truth. That's just a story. It's mythology. Well, the story level, and I could read you some quotations, although I don't think we have time. Maybe I should read one. I bet I should, because I haven't told everyone. You need to know this, I think. Wrong book. I won't overdo this. Glasses. Here we go. It says, woe unto the man, this is from the Zohar, actually it's from, quoted by Louis Ginsburg, says, woe unto the man that asserts that Torah intends to relate only commonplace things in secular narratives. For if this were so, then in the present time, likewise the Torah might be written with more attractive narratives. Now the narratives of the Torah are its garments. He who thinks that these garments are the Torah itself deserves to perish and to have no share in the world to come. Woe unto the fools who look no further when they see an elegant robe. More valuable than the garment is the body which carries it. More valuable even than that is the soul which animates the body. Fools see only the garment of the Torah. The more intelligent see the body, the wise see the soul, its proper being. They actually say that the sequence of letters was determined before the story, and the story was only stabilized as history unfolded. If you wanted to protect a metaphysical coded text, preserving a meditation, You would have to make it plausible and valuable to the general public, because the Inquisition comes through periodically. It's coming through Yugoslavia right now, where they line up the educated people and they shoot them all. And 150, 200 years ago, the Enlightenment showed up, the opposite of the Inquisition. And all the mystics went and got jobs as computer programmers and real estate agents. They joined the opportunity of the New World. And so, in good times and in bad times, you lose those capable of doing the deep meditational exercises, of having the personal gnosis. The only way you can carry a germ into the future through a barren time is in a seed husk, in a vessel. The Kabbalists teach that unity only exists when the flame is wedded to the coal, when the light is in its vessel. That's the wave and the particle. That's the yin and the yang. That's consciousness and physics together. That's spiritual traditions, which are our separate vessels, carrying the same germ, the gnosis inside. Remember, our body, all our organs are different. They all march to a different drummer. They all believe in a different religion. But inside at their core, their spiritual essence, the light in each of those vessels is the same. That's why the Egyptians had high magic. The Bible says that. The Pharaoh knew how to almost keep up with Moses' stuff. So it wasn't as if there wasn't acknowledgement that lots of cultures have knowledge. Nobody who's had an ego-death experience, who's had a enlightenment experience, a near-death experience, an out-of-body experience, a kundalini experience, is going to argue with anybody else particularly. Each of those experiences is personal, but at its core you reach for this transcendental point, this transcendental sun, not the Apollo sun in the sky that materialists worship, the source of the matter of the earth, but the transcendental sun, the seed, which I forget what Rumi said, that's more than a regular seed. The transcendental attractor, not just the sun. So that many faiths and peoples have these models. In fact, if I'm right, since we all have very similar consciousness, every people that pushes the limits of knowledge comes up with the same model. The donut is the most popular cosmological model, both for physicists and metaphysicists, for as long as we've got records. But if the text of the books of Moses, or at least the book of Genesis, although it appears all the books are coded, really records a meditation, it's in fact what Moses came down from the holy mountain with. After all, Moses climbs the holy mountain, the world mountain, Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, Sinai, and comes down the hero's journey and records the path, letter by letter. And if we can step into Moses' Arthur Murray dance shoes, footsteps on the ground, except in our minds, then we step into that revelation. Can it be done? Can a person write out 400,000 letters and get it all right? Could Mozart write a symphony? Could Toscanini hold a symphony in his mind and pull out a note from a particular instrument on the spot? The answer is yes. Is there a musical connection? I thought I mentioned that. Yeah, if you look at the 150th Psalm, it describes all the letters used at Solomon's temple, all the instruments used at Solomon's temple. They all, as you heard from the dinner gong, they're all off of this form. This is the ram's horn. This is a flute. As I said before, the Hebrew word for harp is kinur. I forget which lecture. Did I say it here before? I didn't. As I didn't say it before. The Hebrew word for harp is kinur. Kaf means the palm of the hand. In Ner, well, Hanukkah's coming. Ner is the candles. It's the flame. The flame, the candle in the palm. We call a harp today a hand, and we string it this way. And you can go through all the instruments. A general projective principle, both for speech and for movement and for visualization and for, do those pictures come back? And for black holes. and for apples and cypress trees in the middle of the round garden, and Plato's cave. Remember the sun, reflections, the earth plane, Plato's cave. Let me think if there was anything else. No, I think it's time to, except just finishing off that idea of truth. If the text of Genesis is determined letter by letter in a way similar to the way pi is determined, except in this case, it's the transcendental function that connects our consciousness from heaven to earth, rather than the radius to the circumference of a geometric form, then it could very well be truth with a capital T, without any disrespect for any other teaching or people. It is not just the religious puffery of the Abrahamic faiths. If it's an actual record of an experientially determined sequence of letters, that means something explicit or has a particular effect. The rabbis teach, as the Christian Muslim traditions also teach, that to change any letter of the sacred text would mean the destruction of the universe. Even if you don't know it's pi, even if you think it's a random number, if you change one digit, it's not pi anymore. So in that sense, if this idea is true, then these scriptural texts that have been preserved for us by the vessels of our faiths, think of it, we've got rabbis and priests and ministers and imams, and they're teaching a religion for the people and carrying this DNA, this germ, these sacred texts around, each in its different vessel. But they've done their job, even if they don't taste the water inside, because an acorn husk, the shell, doesn't taste of the germ, the kernel of the new oak tree. It only protects it. So people of faith, even if they don't get to step into the meditation, even if they do not get to be reborn in this ego-death type metaphor, still have provided something very valuable. And you don't have to know any mathematics to do this. Because if you think about it, whether it's in the Bible or in the Iliad or in this little book on the analog, or whether it's the Holy Mountain going to Shambhala, if you follow the hero on his journey, reading his book, his story, over a week or two, you go on the journey with the hero. You identify with it. You're on the expedition. That's what it means to read a book. You identify with the story. And when you recapitulate it to a friend or to yourself a week later, you don't take a week to read it. It's all there in your mind's eye. This path is formed in your mind. And if you've really gone through all the tribulations with the hero, you have already turned this over in your mind. And so the meditational path is open to you. Okay, I think questions are in order. If you don't ask questions, though, I'm going to go back to talking. So there's enough of a thread.
I wonder if you would again do that little hand dance that you did, so that do it slowly so that we can see the form that you create.
I tell you what, before we close, I'll put the music back on and do the hand dance as we go out. And for those who want it, I don't know if we sold any or not, there are some tapes that we brought of just that dance. So there's some video tapes if people who want it. The models will be available perhaps in 6 months or so, as soon as we can get them made.
If the truth, as you said there, may be expressed by the pattern in the Hebrew text that you looked into, may it also be found in the patterns of the writing of other faiths?
The people who have done the statistical work on the books of Moses have told me privately that they've also done some work on the Gospels and have found similar patterns, but don't think it's appropriate for them to work on them or publish them because that would be politically, religiously very complicated. There is also a problem that the Gospels may not be original as we have them, whereas the Dead Sea Scrolls confirm that at least almost back to the Septuagint, the Hebrew text is unchanged. The essentially similar Samaritan text, which reads almost identically, does not have the patterns. The skeptics would say the rabbis added the patterns by adding a few vowels here and there in order to make a correcting pattern so the text couldn't go wrong. So the same evidence that the believers use to prove that the text is special is used by the skeptics to prove it isn't. Is pi random or is it pi? It depends on what you know Is the text ordered or not? It wasn't until I just told you this idea, it was just stories. Now all of a sudden, maybe it's ordered. I don't know.
Stan, you keep referred a couple times to the meditative process, this abstract process that you get the information. So are you inferring that obviously this goes beyond the meaning of the words?
Yes.
And so you're talking about the actual literal sound of the words, the shapes of it?
Yeah, if I could, I don't have time, but the quotes indicate that the shape of the letters, of the breath that makes the letter, the shape of the letter, the tone of the letter, there are several levels, and they all have to be activated. I've only looked at one or two of the levels, and so this is definitely still incomplete. There's a teaching that when Adam first showed up, he gave the creatures their proper names. Just like I showed you this motion that means round, describes something round, in principle, although we haven't checked it in detail, the same could be true of other proper names and forms in the biblical Hebrew, not in modern Hebrew.
The letters look very much like Deuteronomy, which is very early instrumentation.
There may be a connection. The difference between other traditions and this, the Hebrew, Greek, Arabic one, is because they use this meaningful central model. Ordinary ideograms of hand shapes wouldn't do it. You could never recover it if it were lost. It's the coherence of the model that enables it to be reconstructed. It enables the seed, the acorn, the tree to be reborn, even though the seed's been dormant. I better start at this side of the room now. I've been unfair. They say teachers always go, so anybody on this side? Steve?
Can you step through the 310 towards another again? From
Yeah.
how to-
Yeah. You take the
No, start at the top.
the top. Okay, this is the way that you make the knot. You simply take a piece of wire and you take a ring. This is the 3-5 knot. You can see it's got 5 points to it. Okay, and it's got 3 levels. 1, 2, 3. If you cut through it, you cut 3 wires. So this is the 3-5 knot on its flat form. These are 3-7 knots. The difference is just the central core. So that what you do is you wind this knot. It's only a complicated version of the simplest knot. This is the trefoil, the 3-2 knot. This is everybody's simplest possible knot. And of course, it also has a tetrahelical core. If people are interested, I have some more detailed drawings, which I didn't give out on that. So you simply wind this, you weave this basket. It's got 10 points, 10 spirot to the Kabbalists, 10 points. And then you break the ring, you break the orange torus. I'm not going to do it because I'll have to do it. You break the tangle, which was conveniently made by the tangle company, and you remove it. And you're just left with the knot. I'll take a chance and re-knot it. There's the simple knot. The trefoil, this is the simplest knot you can make, right? You just connect it back on itself. Now, putting it back in here I'll do later. So I take the time now, I'll only get it wrong and make myself look silly. Right? I know from experience. So you break the ring, and then you've got this floppy, weaving stuff here. You simply pull apart the loops, flip the C loop, the one loop over on the other side, and then straighten it out. And then it sits on this, all the curling then goes into the middle. I can actually show you that, I think.
So where does the zeroth go?
Well, it doesn't go any place.
outside.
When you flip this over, it becomes this. It disappears. You see,
It
you're going
becomes the
you're going from a flat form, a quasi two-dimensional form, into a quasi three-dimensional form. When you go between dimensions, you add or subtract symmetry. In other words, I didn't bring the model this time, but again, I can show you later, or anybody else. If you make a pentagonal spiral on the ground, you can lift it up and form an octahedral pyramid out of it. You go from 5 symmetry to 4 symmetry as you go from 2 to 3 dimensions. If you go up another level, you could make a tetrahelical spiral out of the octahedral pyramid if you went up to 4 dimensions. In other words, you can always trade dimensionality for symmetry. That's why you can project everything in physics down onto 3 and 4 dimensions, because there's more room for symmetry in 3 and 4 dimensions. So all these higher dimensions don't really exist, which is a very important teaching that Arthur has come up with. in principle, the reason we appear, from a mathematician's point of view, to live in a 3- and 4-dimensional world is because there's more room here for symmetry distinctions. What other kind of distinctions can there be? And distinction is what it's all about. Our hand, we're pointing to these distinctions. Okay? You want me to go any further with this?
That's fine.
Okay. Anybody else? I'm trying to give the left side of the room a chance. Please.
Anticipating that musical piece you played at the beginning of the seminar could probably be quite provocative, meditational.
Yeah.
Will that be available?
As soon as we can make it available. This work is being done under the auspices of the Meru Foundation, which is a nonprofit educational foundation. We are not very well funded. The fellow doing the music is in Los Angeles, and he's currently writing the score for a TV series. They're paying him handsomely, and his reputation depends on it. So us beggars have to wait. But it'll happen eventually. And, we will use the music on the videotape, either on the tape as it was or under the credits one way or another.
Just a quick comment, that musical score that you played at the very beginning, that sounded very similar to some some Indian ragas, the scales involved, as well as Chinese music.
Yeah.
The same pattern.
It's a microtonal scale, a 22-note per octave scale. It turns out it resolves in 27 notes also, so it doesn't matter which alphabet you use. Convenient, eh? We could talk about the relationship between 22, well, let me tell it to you. This is really cute. We know that the 7-color map defines the torus, right? And we know that this guy has 22 faces. But I've already told you, you can take this end and paste it onto this end. So this is like a torus. But wait a minute, this is a linear form with 22 faces, and this is a circular form with 7 regions. 22, 7. Line and circle. Aha, pi. An approximation of pi. But again, a metaphor that's very powerful because it locks into all this cosmology. Did the ancients think that pi was really 22 sevenths? No, of course they didn't. But it was a very handy cosmological metaphor. And it was also easy for calculations when you didn't have pocket calculators.
It's interesting that in the Bible, the value of pi is given at 3.
Not true. In the simple translation, it's given as 3 in King James. But if you actually look at the numerical value of the letters used to spell out that verse, it comes out to 3.14, I think.
And
In Hebrew, yeah, in Hebrew.
well, of course, the word Elohim, the God name Elohim, if you take the value, the initial value, like a moment is 3. And,
30. Moment is 30.
Yeah, just using the
Right, okay.
equating that with 3 and with men as 4, with the 3, 1, 4, 5.
Yeah. But whether that proves anything or not depends on other issues. It may, in context, be interesting. The question of the meaning of Gematria, numerical value of letters in the first place, is an interesting question. It would seem to be meaningless from a technical point of view until you think of these letters as pointing directions. And then all of a sudden, you realize that that's exactly what we do when we tell time. Time is a clock, a 2-dimensional surface with an arrow on it, is the way we make a clock. And that pointing direction does have meaning. The letters have pointing directions, and they can be reduced to, in a diagonal pattern, 1 to 9, then in fact there may be something to certain Gematria. But to apply it to everything indiscriminately, it's hard to know what holds. I'm not a student of Gematria.
It's not in the Bible where the value in the verse is given at 3, which is about the roughest approximation you can get. The actual verse number is 722.
Oh, yeah, I think I saw that someplace. There's a lot more detail to that. In fact, there's a lot of discussion of that. There are other parts of the Bible and also the way the Talmud explains the Bible that are very, very intriguing. But I'm not really an expert, and so I don't want to make statements that I can't back up.
Another question, Stan. Getting back to this motion, have you done any videos or any work actually crafting that motion?
Yeah, the video that we brought is just the demonstration of those hand motions. I don't know, do we have any left? Who's got the videos? Grace? so if you want one, there are tapes here. Anybody else? Anything else you want to talk about?
This is the first time I've had the opportunity to hear about your work. And what I'd like to know is, where are you going with it? I mean, what's the bottom line? What's the point? What's the, it's like, what
All right.
is it?
Yeah. Well, there's several bottom lines. If the sequence of letters in canonized scripture do in fact encode a meditation, it might be very helpful if we recover that meditation. If it has the effect I think it does, namely there's some sort of meditational experience, and that can be verified, then we have found a deep level of meaning. My guess is that that's where the prophetic tradition in Judaism is recorded. That's where the early Christians got their information. That's where the early Muslims got their information. That where are you going to record a prophetic tradition except in your sacred text? Can you record it in the story? I don't think so. People don't believe you when they see. If you told me that you'd been to outer space or you'd seen God or you were up in the chariot or something, how would I know if you actually had that experience? And I couldn't follow you anyway just because you described it to me. But if you could step in the shoes of the experience, if you could do the yoga, then you could have the experience, or I could have it, and then I'd know if it was true or not. Now maybe it's not that. We haven't proven this. Maybe it's just the ground plan for Solomon's temple. Maybe it's just the weaving pattern for the cloth, for the clothing they wore, the sacred garments or the priest's clothing. Whatever it is, if this sequence of letters is determined by something real, then the meaning of those texts is very different than we've been led to believe. For instance, I don't want to make a big thing of it because I don't want to insult anyone. But the literal translation of the text has to be brought into question. I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm saying it's flat. It's too thin. And then if you go from there to creationism, it's like you're saying that God spoke to King James's translators in English, and that's literally a mystical experience. I think it's much more plausible that these texts are meaningful for what they claim to be in their original, and that this simplistic modern view of religion has degraded. It's damned faith by faint praise. Does Jim and Tammy make Christianity look attractive to you? Has anybody converted to Judaism because of Meir Kahane? How many Islamic mystics has the Ayatollah brought home? That's not my sense of what a person like Maimonides, a great physician, scholar, author, recognized as a brilliant man in his age, would have spent his life studying. We wouldn't find that plausible today. An intelligent person would look it over and say, this looks good, this doesn't look good, wait a minute, it's silly, and walk away. If we assume it's all mythology, well, then we're really insulting people who have incredibly good track records in other fields. It can't be all mythology. I haven't seen the documents myself, but I've read enough accounts in various other people's reports now. A few years back, Harvard finally published, it's only 300 years late, the remaining works of Isaac Newton. In these alchemical works, too embarrassing to be published, Newton points out that he discovered the laws of motion and gravitation from his study of Egyptian metaphysics, his word for Kabbalah. The rabbis were allowed back into England only 30 years before Newton did this. And Newton made his own personal translation of the text of Genesis from the Hebrew himself, and it got him in so much trouble that he lost his Lucasian seat at Trinity College because of it, because the Christians couldn't accept what he found. The simple Christians. I'm not trying to demean Christianity. It may be, this is the apple that hit Newton on the head. Look! Let's make a pizza. Okay, let's make a pizza. I got a lump of dough. It's going to be a simple mathematician's pizza, okay? And I got one piece of pepperoni in it. No cheese, it's a kosher pizza. Can't have cheese and meat at the same time. It's beef pepperoni. It's going to be pretty good. It's tofu pepperoni. Let's be veggie, okay? It's pretty good. All right, we take this little piece of pizza dough and we give it a spin, okay? Right? Guy spins it and toss it in the air, okay? This is Mathematician's pizza dough, so it's a little more flexible than other dough. We give it enough spin so that the time it takes to go up and come down, it turns exactly 1.5 times. You could arrange that. And in that same time, this little blob spreads out into a disc. It's called a pizza pie. And our piece of pepperoni, which was sort of just in the middle with the dough, because it's not perfectly centered, we couldn't have thrown it exactly right, is now way up on the rim of the pizza disc. That's the path of this shape. You throw it in the air, goes up and comes down by the inverse square law. It's rotating 1.5 times. See, 1.5 times. It's half of the 3 turns down the core. Okay? It's got constant angular velocity. It conserves angular momentum, so it has an accelerating linear rate as it pulls out, and it's got a square law rate as it goes up and down. Okay? 3 parametric equations at 3 levels: linear, constant, linear, and square. The constant and linear are the ordinary laws of Newton, laws of inertia, and the square laws of gravitation. It makes an apple. And hits you on the head, maybe head, brain. From a tree. Remember, I had a correspondence with a really fine fellow named Peter Dawkins, I believe, who runs the Francis Bacon Research Trust in Britain. Peter tells me that Bacon attempted to reconcile English with Hebrew to make it a sacred language. It was the same time as Newton, basically, very roughly. So this was the kind of thing that was going on there. Did the ancients have sufficient mathematical skills to do this sort of thing? Well, Benoit Mandelbrot attributes fractal mathematics to Archimedes. Archimedes was alive at the time the Septuagint translation, the first translation of the Hebrew text into Greek, was made, about 285 BCE. So it comes together, it fits, it's plausible. Okay? Did I lose the question? I went off on a tangent there. Anybody else? Yes.
Just a quick question. What Hebrew translation would you recommend getting?
Art Scroll Missouri, if you want the text. And also, if you want readability, get Kaplan with the Hebrew, not without it. And if you want very Jewish, get Hirsch. But, you know, I mean, what?
Did you say that Harvard was translating the alchemical works or publishing?
Harvard apparently did a few years ago. I think so. I've been reading references to it in other people's works. I haven't seen it.
You can get it?
I think so. I don't know. I haven't tried. I'd sure like to see it, though, if you get a copy. Definitely like to see it. Because I bet there's a lot else in there, too.
If you cut the apple that way, you get a 5-star pattern.
Exactly. Yeah, 5-star pattern. Really? You think so? You get a 5-star pattern. Isn't that amazing?
A 1-star pattern with
5 points, yeah, right. Actually, it's 5 against 5. The Zohar says 5 against 5, 5 against 5, 5 against 5. 5 against 5 makes 10. That's also, if you look down DNA, you'll see that. You'll see the 10 points. That's why the tetra-helix that Fuller makes really does make the DNA model.
I'm trying to, the connection that you're saying is, excuse me, the meditation that you're saying is it's a movement meditation on the Tanakh, is that?
Yes. Yes, and it would also, I'm only showing the hand motions, they would also be music and body motions, and perhaps a breathing at the same time.
Now, the question that comes in here is that with a lot of the work that you're doing here, in its way is a certain amount of it is an intellectualization of this process. So I think that right.
Well, the point, if I can interrupt, is that if this model is valid, it must be equally light and vessel. It must be light emotion and vessel logic. So you have to have both the personal feeling and the thinking.
The
Hakma and Bina. Continue.
So but the only way that you could actually prove it would be by doing this meditation.
Well, it depends what you want to prove. If you want to prove that they use this model, you can do it perfectly logically. And in fact, if we could afford to do a computer simulation of the path specified by the letters in the Tanakh, which is the books of the Torah and the writings, then that could be demonstrated on the computer to be a path. If we look at the right direction, we see a meaningful pattern, not just a pattern, but a meaningful pattern, then we'd know there was a pattern there. If you know how many digits from pi you are, you can identify the string as pi. But to prove the existence of God, no.
No, not prove the existence of God, but prove this as a path.
Prove that they did this? Yes,
this as a
you can do it analytically.
Well, that's not that's what I'm questioning. I'm questioning that you could do this analytically, that in order to reproduce the path to the mystical experience, if this is, as you said, pointed to, you would have to
do it.
You'd have to do it.
Right. You could prove that there was something there. You couldn't prove it had an effect on you until you did it. Let me throw something else on the table because you brought up a thought to me. This is a very controversial issue. You've seen Dina Dell on television, the TV doctor, talk about circumcision. And there's been a lot of discussion about circumcision is unnecessarily mutilation of a poor newborn innocent child. Or it's defended because it's a religious thing, or because it's good for medical practice, or sanitate, health, hygiene, whatever. All kinds of discussion. Everything but the actual issue. Consider what we know from abreactive therapies these days, when a person relives their neonatal experiences, how primary they are to forming and nucleating personality. Consider that particular, you're probably familiar with Stanislav Grof, who's got his 4 kinds of birthing situations that lead to 4 personality types. 4 kinds of birth experiences, where you get caught in the canal or how much trouble you get getting out. It leads to personality types. Consider what would happen if you took a whole population, in this case, all the men, and you performed the same trauma, minor trauma, but trauma, at the same time in life across the population. When a child is first born, that's when the brain's neural connections are both sprouting like crazy and ablating if not stimulated. It's been demonstrated, it's fairly famous now, if you raise cats in a room without vertical lines, they'll never see vertical lines. That part of the brain doesn't work. So if you perform the same ritual procedure across the population, you could never predict what would happen to an individual, but on average, you would predict a particular personality type. You'd predict a particular brain propensity. You'd stimulate certain neurons and allow others to ablate. What if circumcision performed as it's supposed to be performed, not arbitrarily by a doctor at 2 days, but at a particular time in brain development, produced a kind of personality on average, only on average, that would have a propensity to be able to do these meditations? Then that procedure would be a true covenant. Because if the meditation is the means of attaining the prophetic experience, the transcendental experience, anything you could do to make it easier would be a benefit to maintaining that tradition. The reason given, by the way, why women aren't circumcised is because women go through the birthing experience, which is an ego-death experience, and don't need that particular stimulation. Those connections are there. I think it may have to do with the shorter Y chromosome. I'm not sure. So you can see that even something that seems barbaric and arbitrary can be if it's done in the barbaric and arbitrary way. But if you understand its purpose and it's done for that purpose, then it could be functional and real and can be evaluated on that basis. Don't circumcise a kid if you're not going to teach him to meditate. If you are, maybe you should. I'm not saying you should on my word, but I'm saying you should consider this idea. I'm getting the wind-up signal. How much time do we have? 2 minutes. Right, well, nobody jump. One, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to especially thank Arthur and Ruth Young and the other people who've made this possible. I definitely want to thank my wife Cynthia, who hand-colored all these drawings for you. We can't afford color Xerox. And I want to encourage anyone with questions or comments or wanting to learn more to please get in touch with us. Meru Foundation, as I said, is a nonprofit educational foundation. We think, to answer your question, if these ideas come out, they are going to be healing if it's done responsibly and respectfully. If I can put this on a hilltop in Jerusalem and show Arab kids and Jewish kids that their alphabets come from the same hand, then they might get the idea. We didn't have time to talk at all, but you have heard, let me defer to the quotation on the little booklets we give out from Nick Herbert. He says, one of the greatest scientific achievements imaginable would be the discovery of an explicit relationship between the waveform alphabets of quantum theory and certain human states of consciousness. General projective principle from consciousness to physics, the human hand. I promised to go through the meditation and play the music, so if everyone will give us another second or two, we will do it.